So welcome everybody. We're super excited to have you here today to talk about pursuing race equity during a pandemic. And we have some awesome presenters here with us. We have Sana Fidel of the Citizens for Juvenile Justice in Massachusetts and Rita Anatiri from New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And they're just gonna share a little bit of their perspectives today. Obviously recognizing that we had planned this conversation before George Floyd's incident and the subsequent uprisings. And so we'll try to add in some current context as well in terms of how that's changed the landscape and really sort of fueled continued pushes for racial equity in this moment. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and move into questions. And I'll pose them broadly, and I don't know, maybe Rita, you want to start, and then Sana can follow up and we can go from there. But our first question is really, how has race been a factor in your particular state's response to COVID-19? And if you could speak a little bit both to the health piece, health equity piece, as well as youth justice outcomes, that would be great.
Sure. So thanks, Allison, for inviting me here today to talk about this important subject. And hello, everyone. At the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, I lead the 150 Years is Enough campaign, which is our campaign to close youth prisons and invest in community-based programming. I work very closely with our national partner, Youth First, in 10 other states across the country to develop strategies and policies to transform the New Jersey, to transform the youth justice system from the current punitive model into a restorative model. In New Jersey, we have 3 youth prisons and 11 community residential homes. There are approximately 275 young people in these facilities. Today, a Black child is 21 times more likely to be detained or committed in our state than a white child is, even though they commit most offenses at the same rate. So shamefully, New Jersey has the highest racial disparity rate in the country. And so out of 275 young people in prison, there are just 8 who are white. I'll also mention that New Jersey has the 4th highest racial disparity rate for Latina and Latino youth in the nation. And we're spending $300,000 per year to incarcerate each child. So we're spending a lot of money to lock kids away. And just to finish up on the background information, I just wanted to mention that through our advocacy efforts in 2018, the state made a decision to close 2 of our 3 youth prisons. And so for over a year, we have been a member of Governor Murphy's task force working to determine what the system will look like after closure. But most importantly, you know, our position is that New Jersey should not build any new youth prisons. And we're also asking for a $100 million investment in the community. So now as we face COVID-19, you can see that a disproportionate number of Black kids are being impacted by the virus in our youth prisons. As many of you know, COVID-19 hit New Jersey rather hard back in mid-March. And so on March 19th, the campaign sent a letter to our governor and the Juvenile Justice Commission calling on them to put a plan in place to protect incarcerated youth and to release as many youth as possible. We asked that the JJC publish data on how many staff and youth were testing positive for the virus, and that was a challenge to get them to do so. But finally, they agreed to start posting data on their website around the 3rd week of April. And so when we started looking at the data, we started to see that staff members were starting to test positive. Their testing protocol was that they were doing temperature screening of staff members as they entered the facilities. So they were not actually testing, and as you know, asymptomatic people can give the virus to other folks. So at this point, none of the young people were being tested. They were doing temperature screening Staff, however, started to have come in with elevated temperatures, and then they went out and they tested on their own, because at this point, the state was not testing them, and their numbers started to go up. And so what happened was the JJC started testing in the facilities where these staff members started testing positive, and the young people's numbers started to go up. And so we started to see it creep up in young people testing positive for COVID-19. So that started a second fight to test every young person and staff in those facilities. That took some effort, but they agreed. And so I think we may have been the first state in the country that actually started testing all of our young people and all of the staff members. So as of May 31st, the JJC completed the first round of testing for all of our young people and staff. Currently 36 staff members and 26 youth have tested positive for the virus. And 29 young people have been released. And so the release rate has been slow. You know, we've really been pushing to release more young people to get them out of harm's way. But at least 29 have been released. And the JJC is currently doing a second round of testing. And so you know, we continue to monitor what's going on. We continue to push. And I know you have a question about strategies and legislation, so I'll wait and talk about that in the next question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Retha, and welcome, Nicole. We're just going through, and we heard a bit from Retha about what's happening in New Jersey. We're going to hear from Sana, and then it'd be great to hear from you just about what you're seeing across the country. So we'll sort of move forward. But Sana, do you want to give us a little bit of background in terms of what you were seeing in Massachusetts?
So Massachusetts was one of an early epicenter in early March. We had a state of emergency come in middle of March, and that's when our focus has shifted to COVID. Just so that you know, like the work of CFJJ, we are working on behalf of young people in the juvenile system, but also we're looking at young people in the adult criminal justice, in the criminal legal system, looking at, and one of our main campaigns is raising the age that 18, 19, and eventually 20-year-olds are under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. So we have been doing monitoring and advocacy in both systems for young people. So what we have seen is that our juvenile justice system actually was one of the first state agencies to be proactive in their work around COVID. So one of the things that we have in our, just like get a sense of like how Massachusetts operates, we have a range of facilities from locked, secure, hardware secure facilities up and step down from staff secure programs, residential programs, group homes, and including supervision in homes and independent living for young people. So when a young person is committed to the Department of Youth Services, they have a bunch of different modalities that they can be placed at. That flexibility in placement gave DYS relative ability to be more flexible in how they transition young people out of locked facilities. One of the early things that happened in DYS, the Department of Youth Services, is ending family visits. That's one of the first things that came in, and not stopping, but highly recommending that attorneys meet virtually with the young people, but they did not restrict access. It was a decision between the young person and their attorney. DYS was one of the first state agencies to go around and asking to procure iPads to allow for moving family visitation, attorney visitation from in-person to virtual. And allow and having a set system of, you know, they have an expanded list of who was considered family and approved for these visits, and the limits were a maximum of 1 hour per day to have those conversations. In contrast, young people in the adult system, because they are seen as less likely to be a risk, a medical risk to COVID, they're practically invisible in the work in the adult system. A lot of the advocacy in the adult system was around decarceration for people with underlying health conditions, people with 50 and older, and a lot of, and people with low level offenses. Our data does not show anything around the impact of the adult system by age. And so we cannot parse out how what's the impact for young people in that age. And none of that data is by race and ethnicity. The Department of Youth Services started releasing their race and ethnicity data by middle of May. So we have 3 or 4 weeks worth of data of how they're responding by race from then. What we know in contrast of the teenagers who are in adult facilities are in, have been practically in lockdown and practical solitary confinement for the past 2 months. We're hearing a lot of mental health crises with young people because of those conditions. There's, I want to say it's like, 23 hours in your cell a day. The access to family was restricted right away. Access to attorneys was also restricted. And in some facilities, I would say like state facilities and one county facility where people are able to access 20-minute phone calls to family members, either twice a week or 4 times a week. That's the max they're getting is in one facility. They're getting 20 minutes 4 times a week. So that the contrast was pretty significant. In terms of the decarceration work, there was the work around detention was one of the stickiest areas around trying to keep young people out of detention, because those are decisions by judges who were, there's an administrative advocacy with judges around how to expedite detention releases, but that took about like a month post the state of emergency to happen. In terms of young people who are committed, our DYS had modalities. They were able to utilize grants of conditional liberty, where you can have, you're committed but are able to be supervised in the community to reduce the number of young people in facilities. So we can tell, what you can know right now is there's about a little over 300 young people who are committed to DYS in residential facilities. More than half of them are in a community-based setting, whether in a group home or at home or an independent living program. The data coming out of kids who are in locked facilities, what we know is just New Jersey and practically every other state, we have a very high rate of young people who are committed and in locked facilities. So we have data from last year, because we have issues of data transparency about that, but about a year and a half ago, we were able to find data that showed in detention that Black children were up to 2.5 times more likely to be detained for very similar offenses compared to white kids. That data, once that research came out, our court system pulled back the data and said you can no longer use this data to do any follow-up around the Hispanic to white disparity. So we've been fighting that fight on that particular data set for the past year and a half. But knowing that there is disparity pre-COVID, we're looking at, how is the state responding? So we have more Black and white and Hispanic kids in locked facilities in Massachusetts, disproportionately. However, when you look at the number of young people who are being released and moving from residential settings and secure settings into community-based settings, we're actually seeing more reductions of Black and Hispanic kids than we do of white people. So just to give you a sense, when the state of emergency happened middle of March, so March 16th up until a week ago, so June 12th, there were 78 young people who are Hispanic young people who are committed in a secure setting. And today, a week ago, that number went down to 57. And in comparison, there were 84 committed young people who are in a community-based setting, so slightly more than that. So it's more than half are in a community-based setting. But when you're looking at the number of young people in community settings, it's now up to 92. So the difference was there were 6 more young people in a community-based setting than those in residential in middle of March. Right now, that number is up to 35 more in the community-based setting compared to those in a residential setting. For Black children, there were 63 young people in a residential setting compared to 41 who are community-based settings. So in that case, the numbers were flipped, where we had more young people committed in young people in a secure setting, about 50% more in a secure setting compared to community-based setting. That number is still higher for those Black children, Black youth in a secure setting, but the difference is lower. So now there are 50 young people, Black young people in a secure setting, down 13 less than 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And the increase in those in community-based settings is 46. So now we have 5 more young people in a community-based setting. For young people, in comparison, there were only 36 white young people in a community in secure settings. That went down to 30. So 6 young people, fewer white young people in a community-based in residential secure settings in the past 3 months. And there was 26 young people in a community-based setting at the time of the state of emergency. That went down to 24. So the changes for white children is there were much fewer white children in the system altogether, and the reduction and the change from March to today is slightly, like it's 2 to 4 is the difference. And I think we'll move on from here.
Thank you, Sana. So thank you, Sana. I wonder, Retha, if you want to speak a little bit, I know you talked about this earlier, about the strategies that have been successful as you guys have done your work in New Jersey, particularly during the pandemic, and sort of what has led to decarceration there.
Sure. So we are actually implementing a few strategies. In March, when we sent the letter to Governor Murphy urging him to protect young people, we also launched a phone to action campaign inviting residents of New Jersey to urge Governor Murphy as well to release young people and to move them out of harm's way. We have youth councils in New Jersey, one in the northern part of the state and one in the southern part of the state. And so the youth councils led a social media campaign challenging their peers to participate in our phone to action campaign and to call or email the governor. I mean, they really jumped in and participated well. I mean, there were over 4,000, 5,000 likes and phone calls and emails into the governor. In another strategic move, the campaign started to collaborate with adult and immigrant detention advocates to leverage strategies and efforts to protect all incarcerated people and call for the release of as many as possible. So in New Jersey, there are 18,000 incarcerated adults. And as of June 17th, actually around the same time that we won when the governor and the state decided to test all young people who are incarcerated, they also agreed to test all adults. And so as of June 17th, 756 staff members tested positive and 2,546 incarcerated adults have tested positive. 47 adults have died from the virus, and that's the highest in the country. And so, you know, we thought it was very important for us to join forces and elevate the importance of keeping all incarcerated people out of harm's way. And on May 28th, we partnered with the adult advocates and we held a Say Their Names funeral processional which was a caravan. It was held at our state capitol. Over 450 cars participated. So it was huge, very successful. There, I think one of the most important things in that is that the family members of incarcerated young people and family members of incarcerated adults who had passed away were at the head of this processional. They were very active in it. We had a visual. We also had kind of a town hall in which there was parents, again, of incarcerated youth and family members of folks who have passed away to participate in that town hall. And they talked about how it was impacting them personally. So that's just a few of the strategies that we've been using that we think so far have engaged people on the ground and have been pretty successful. And at the next time I talk, I'll talk a little bit about what legislation came out of that. Thank you.
So it's so exciting, Rita. But when I steal some of your ideas. Our strategies have been mostly behind the scenes and through administrative and legislative work. CFJJ is a member of, a larger advocacy community on behalf of young people and adults who are in the legal system. So I can talk about some of the things that our partners have done to pursue some of these reforms. There's been legislative, administrative, and judicial advocacy in Massachusetts. A lot of it has actually been focusing on the adult system because we were able to get a lot of reforms done in the juvenile system through administrative work. Unfortunately, even though Massachusetts is seen as like very blue and progressive, many of our elected officials worry about, there's been a lot of rhetoric about any kind of releases or decarceration and a lot of fear mongering. So elected officials are like, well, we don't want to be the ones responsible for that. What we found more successful is pushing things behind the scenes administratively. So the first work was around working with the courts around the detention of young people. So our courts shut down and said only emergency matters can move forward. And those emergency matters were arraignments and dangerousness hearings, and that's it. So if you go in and you're arraigned, then you get stuck in detention because your case cannot move forward. And that was where we identified was the biggest area where we needed advocacy for young people. So since the late March standing order of the courts, the Public Defender Agency in Massachusetts has been working to try to expand what courts are able to do in terms of what is defined as emergency, and also allowing courts to do more non-emergency matters. So the biggest one was around the detention decisions and being able to get young people back who are in detention back in a Zoom in a Zoom court session or a telephonic session to have reconsideration of bail. And that was once that happened, we had a lot, that had a significant impact of having more young people being in the community at home until the courts are able to open again for have arraignment. So their cases are they're on hold, but at least they're at home they're able to stay at home up until the courts are able to get their cases again. The one area where we're trying to figure out, how that was a most recent expansion are cases where, okay, the decision has been to detain that child and you are going to be locked in a locked facility, even after reconsideration. Well, what happens because, you're basically stuck there for a very, very long time. You're not getting any of the services that are offered. You're not able to move your case forward and find like, no, my case is going to be dismissed or whatever. So you're stuck there. So the Public Defender Agency, again, has been working with the courts to say, how can we expand, if you're able to negotiate or work, outside of the courts to move a case forward, whether for a plea, so that they're, if they're on the path to be committed, a plea, or if the case is going to be dismissed, expedite that so we can get the kid home. That's been moving. It's the kids who tend to are getting stuck right now are those who are held because of a dangerousness hearing, which is about 2/3 of the kids who are in detention are held under the dangerousness statute, and the others whose case is like they're pending a jury trial. Our courts, we have not figured out how we're going to do jury trials. And I know that's one of the things we've been looking at. Like, we don't have an advocacy strategy around whether, but the biggest thing we're looking at right now is if we're going to be doing virtual, telephonic or video court cases, because that's what we're pushing. Like, this is as best as we can. We don't want to get kids get stuck. How do we address the racial inequity of video conferencing and telephonic conferencing, as well as the age issues with these virtual sessions? So, for example, a young person, how is a young person going to be able to talk to their attorney? When a parent, and a parent has to be part of the court proceedings, who is responsible for bringing the parent in? If the parent is going to be adversarial to on behalf of the child, like, who is going to be like, right now they're asking the public defender to bring in parents to these hearings, and it might be, they might say like, that might be adversarial to my client. I don't want to be doing that. So those are some of the things about like, how do you do things that are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for young people? And I can tell you, as a mother of a teenager, like, Zoom sessions, like, you're not really as engaged. And when you have loss of liberty as a consequence of not being engaged, how do you make sure that those are developmentally appropriate? And we're hearing a lot about, there's a lot of convenience for judges, a lot of convenience for the adults in the system about, I can do this from home. This is convenient for me. I don't have to drive my client around. How can we make sure that as we move forward during the pandemic, and hopefully after things open up again, that what are the things we don't want to be held in these sessions? The second piece about that is the racial inequities. We know there's a lot of research about how, facial recognition and all that, like, how video sees people whose skin tone is darker than those who have lighter skin tones. The expressions are going to be harder to see. How does that impact if you have a jury trial? Like, I do this all the time. Like, does that mean I'm like angry, or am I pensive? Like am I zoned out? So there's things like that, like, there is some, I haven't been able to find it, but that's one of the things we're looking at. Like, what is the research saying about perceptions of others when you're looking at someone who, because their skin tone is darker, that we assume that there are going to be consequences because of some bias. And how do we address that and make that a valid, like a big part of the conversations about reopening and what stays after the, like, how do you address that during the pandemic, but also what stays and what does not stay after the pandemic? So that's like a longer term advocacy strategy around research. In terms of more specific, so in addition to opening up the courts and getting cases moved, again, the idea of detained kids and who's stuck in detention is the one we're trying to find more solutions to. But also looking at, we're doing a lot of decarceration work. Well, what are the supports for young people once they're in the community? That was something like, the whole panic was in kids' insecure facilities. Like, well, what supports are they having, and how are they supporting them? How are they connected to school? One of the issues we've identifying is once they go back to community, it's hard to transition back to school. And how do you make sure that they're connected? And also that because they have a court case we're actually working with our education agency around, if someone's been suspended or expelled because of their court case, well, now everybody is an in-home suspension, like everybody. So they should have equal access to education, and their court case should not be the one that is limiting them. So that's an area we're doing, again, administrative advocacy on. We also have legislation that we're pushing, but the administrative we're feeling administrative was going to be the fastest route to get that. In terms of the young people who are stuck in the adult system, as I mentioned earlier, they're probably, again, because there is no data by race and age in what's happening in the adult system, it's just big numbers. We're assuming that young people, so in the adult system, the advocacy was litigation and legislation. The litigation was able to get more people out of the pretrial detention in the adult system, because the court said that is what the judges have decisions on that. So we want to expedite releases out of detention. It's helping some people. It's not it's not huge. And so in one county it's huge because it's a partnership between the judge and the court and the district attorney, but most of them it's not a significant drop in detention, but it is happening. The people who are stuck in the adult system are those who are sentenced to incarceration. The court said that is not our jurisdiction. It is an administrative decision, and the governor has said there will be no decarceration under my watch. So my parole board, my Department of Corrections are not going to be releasing anybody. So any releases have been mostly around people whose sentences have ended. The court basically said in the court case, there's 300 people who have been approved for parole. So many of those have been incarcerated in the adult system as teenagers. Again, we don't know those numbers, but a significant number. We know from other states' research that the vast majority of, or disproportionate number of people who are sentenced to long sentences have been those who have been sentenced under the age of 25. So now, many of them, 300 at that point, were eligible for parole, but have been stuck in incarceration for up to a year because they don't have a release plan. And then COVID added a new problem of, well, if you get released, you're going to get homeless, you're going to pick up COVID because you're homeless, so let's keep you here because you're safer in a locked facility. And there was advocacy administratively around that. And the defenders went back to the courts to try to fight that issue, but we can strongly suggest the governor to do that. For young people, because we're seeing that the decarceration, and there is legislation currently pending to looking at the CDC risk factors and saying you should look at those as to expedite, have people serve home confinement or some other community-based, serve their sentence of incarceration in a community-based setting. And also looking at people whose sentences are almost over, or they're there for like these low-level offenses. Like, look at those conditions and say, can those people be served, complete their sentence at home? So for young people, because of their age, we are assuming they're more likely to remain incarcerated. So our advocacy has been around what kind of services they're able to get. They are not getting any education. First thing that stopped was visits with families. Right after or at the same time, any kind of education access was limited. So we know that our state, your young people up until the age of 22 are eligible for public education if they have an IEP. None of that, that door was shut from mid-March for anybody who has an IEP in an adult facility. That's because of the decision of the sheriffs and the Department of Correction does not have that, even they don't have access to it. So we have significant concerns about how they're being served.
Thank you. I want to pivot back to you, Rita. I've really heard what you were saying, Sana, particularly around court cases and folks looking maybe off in the distance, right? And not necessarily getting the sympathy of a jury court. And that really resonated with me as I'm thinking about what face am I making on the Zoom call? So I'm sure it's even harder for young people, obviously. So that was an interesting point that I thank you for raising. And Rita, I know you mentioned that you guys have had some significant wins in New Jersey, and I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that. So I wanted to go back to you to share those with us.
Sure. So I actually wanted to deal with your question as well around building equity. And I'll talk about the legislation in that. But we believe at least two strategies are required. And one, of course, is to advocate for and pass legislation. And so on specifically regarding COVID-19, on May 28th, on the same day as our Say Your Name funeral processional caravan, one of our senators, Senator Nellie Poe, introduced a public health credit bill And that bill will allow incarcerated adults and youth to earn credits that will take up to 1 year off of their terms or their sentences for early release. This will impact approximately 4,000 adults and 50 to 70 youth. And so we're currently working hard and pushing to get this bill approved and folks sign up on both the Assembly and the Senate side so that it can get to Governor Murphy's desk as soon as possible for signature, so we can remove as many adults and young people out of these unhealthy environments. Beyond COVID-19, we've been working on closing our youth prisons for the last couple of years. And so May of last year, we introduced the New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act that calls for closure of youth prisons, the two that we talked about, no new construction, and $100 million investment in community programming. So with everything that's going on now, with folks in the street asking for more investment in communities, we've been working for the last 3 years on really moving money out of the incarceration, prison system into the communities, and we're hoping that we can get that done. This bill was reintroduced in January for the new legislative period. And so, we're going to be pushing that simultaneously as we push the other legislation to release people because of COVID-19. The second way we believe we believe you need to build equity is to include folks in the community. So community engagement is critical, and accountability, because without that, things just don't move. You can, first of all, you need community engagement to even get bills introduced, right? Because legislators have to see that there's some support in the community. And once legislation is passed, you need the community to make sure that it's implemented, right? And so in order for things to be equitable, you need civic engagement, you need community engagement to keep pushing. And so we are now working on a community engagement tool, which is outlining how folks in the community can do two things. One is, because we're pushing to have more young people leave youth prisons and go back to their communities, where we are outlining how communities can support a more holistic reentry program, right? Because we want to make sure that they reintegrate back into their communities in a smooth way, right? We want it to be rapid. But we also want to make sure that they stay there. And so in that community engagement toolkit, we're also outlining how our communities can build restorative justice hubs so that there is some continuity behind young people who are participating in a reentry program, but reentry programs only last for about 6 months to a year. And so we want to make sure that we stay connected to the young people, that they have a place to go if they need additional services, and that they stay out of the system. So that will be a place where if there are any issues that come up in their communities, they can come to this hub. We can bring people who are harmed with people who harmed and talk about it and resolve issues without them going back into a youth prison environment. And so we're hoping in the July timeframe to introduce this toolkit as another strategy in building equity and accountability in the community.
Sounds great, and the toolkit sounds incredibly helpful. So looking forward to seeing that and sharing it with everybody. I wonder, and thank you too for sort of adding in how the current, I don't know what to call it, but the current uprisings, right, with George Floyd in the wake of that and the push for racial equity is playing out right beside the pandemic, and how that's changing the push for young people to be servers at home and to really deconstruct both the policing institution, but also the institution of criminal and youth justice. And so it's really interesting to have both of these sort of once in a lifetime or once in a generation, maybe once in a generation seems right, issues playing out at the same time and really pushing for reform. Sana, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what you guys are doing to move closer to equity in Massachusetts?
So CFJJ, our push for racial equity has been a longstanding push. As you mentioned earlier, Allison, like this feels like a once in a generation movement that people who normally are not at the table are like, oh, we want to do something. And we want to be able to mobilize those emotions into action. So we have several things that we're working on regarding racial equity in Massachusetts, things that we may have never had the door open for us, knowing how our elected officials are risk averse to many things. So one of our top priority continues to be access to racial data. We have been fighting this fight for 16 years. We have been fighting publicly, behind closed doors. Like I mentioned, and I alluded to earlier, whenever we are able to get data that shows that there's racial inequity, rather than saying, okay, we knew that there's a problem, now we've diagnosed it, let's come up with solutions, the door to data was the way to solve it. No data, no problem. So we continue to fight that fight. We've been fighting that fight for a long time, and right now we're saying if you care about racial equity, this is the first. You cannot hide behind data not to do that. So we've been that is one of our that continues to be our top priority. The other piece is around raising the age. What we know is there's racial inequity in every legal system. We know there's racial inequity from the point someone walks out of their door up until through incarceration. Like every single decision point there is racial inequity. We know that. But we also know that in the adult system, the racial inequity is exacerbated. When at least in the juvenile system, there is some motion, like it's much harder to have any kind of equity in the adult system. So one of the things we're saying is when you have teenagers in adult system, you have poor outcomes for kids and poor outcomes for public safety. Young people are not treated in a developmentally appropriate way, which means they are being harmed in their development. They're not accessing what they need in terms of family, community, pro-social connections, education, whatever you need. They are not accessing that in the adult system. So not only are you thwarting their own development, you're actually not giving them the tools to be able to, you're taking away tools that help them transition positively into adulthood. In addition, the collateral consequences of being in the adult system will follow you for the rest of your life, and they're much harsher than the juvenile system. So knowing that Black and brown young people are predominantly, like, overrepresented in the adult system, the harm to them is an overrepresentation in the harm to young people. We know, like, you know, if you're in that age group, you're in school or you're in college. And those, you know, that's what you're getting. And if you're in an adult system, you're not getting any of that, so you're having a disproportionate harm. So we are continuing to push to raise the age. We want to get 18, 19, and 20-year-olds gradually out of the adult system into the juvenile system, and it's one way to address the racial inequities. It is, for us, it is not a decarceration movement. We're not moving them from, you know, it's not a panacea. For us, this is a harm reduction. It's a harm reduction policy. In addition, we're doing some work around, you know, the work around policing and use of force and all sorts of that. So we're in the conversations about how does that look for young people. So, for example, there's legislation that was introduced in Massachusetts around use of force by any law enforcement, including, you know, police, private college or security officers there, as well as by corrections staff. We want to be able to say, like, yes, there's these use of force standards, but also you have to understand with young people, you need additional protections. A young person, we have protections in our education system around and treatment systems around restraints, but law enforcement is explicitly excluded from those protections against restraints. We want to talk about that with young people. We also want to talk, when we talk about de-escalation and the use of force, we want to talk about it has to also be developmentally appropriate. Like, how do you de-escalate within adolescence? We're also talking about things around police training and accountability, and just bringing in the sort of how to work with young people in those conversations. And those have been happening. It's been about a week, and it's moving fast. And part of me is excited that this is, people are finally talking. We're talking even like, revamping the gang database in Massachusetts, something that we have not been able to touch in the past. And we're thinking the door is open. So I'm excited that the door is open. I'm terrified that it's a creak in the door, and this is it. If you don't get it now, we're never going to address this again. And that's what terrifies me, that if we don't get it now, we're never going to address racial equities later. Even though there's verbal commitment, that's one thing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I hear from you that there's obviously a sense of urgency with all the work that we're doing. And I really felt the sense of urgency in getting kids home when the pandemic hit in terms of health outcomes for kids. And obviously in the wake of George Floyd, there's a real urgency to make sure that no other person dies at the hands of police. And so I know there's been a massive push among our network, and you guys included, in terms of really transforming the system, right? And making sure that the system that we have, which isn't working for anybody, is not the system we have next year or 10 years from now. So I'm with you that there's a real sense of urgency, and hopefully this moment in time can prove one that we can get a lot of things changed. So I want to thank you both for joining and sticking with us through sort of the ups and downs of this recording. As folks probably saw, we had Nicole Porter hop on really quickly from the Sentencing Project. She had a family emergency, so needed to go, but really we were hoping that she could share just a little bit about how racial justice impact statements, which have been passed, I know, in New Jersey, as well as Iowa and Connecticut, have been starting to be used as a tool across the country in trying to reduce disparities as well, and how right now they've predominantly been used in the criminal justice sphere. I know New Jersey is doing them specifically in youth justice, which is a really big win for youth justice movement, but how we can also apply that to health equity outcomes as well as just broad equity outcomes. And so we'll share more on that, and hopefully we can get Nicole back to talk more about that in the future, but just wanted to acknowledge her hopping on and her expertise, and hopefully we'll be able to share that with the network soon. So thank you all.